Okay, well, I'm making a video here. That is what I'm doing. Just randomly in the middle of my evening, as I sit in the glow of the Indigo parking lot, waiting for my daughters, who just had to come look for some anime books. While they're in there, I thought, hey, let me try to make a video to introduce myself and where I'm coming from for my meetup group that I seem to have started. So my name is Sean. My name is Sean Reese, and I was born in the lovely Twin Island country called Trinidad and Tobago, off the coast of South America. And I live in Mississauga with my wife, 4 kids. I'm a teacher. I've had a very interesting path of life whereby I've had many different interesting paths of life, but one that many people find interesting is that I became a fully qualified CPA, is what they call it now. It used to be called CA when I got qualified. And so, went to university for that, did the whole, got a big job in one of the big, I don't even know how many are now, but there've been so many. It was called Coopers and Lybrand at the time. I think it's still called PricewaterhouseCoopers. So I was a CPA, but found out my first kind of like idea of a spiritual awakening was when I had accomplished everything that on paper I thought that I needed in life, and the equation should equal happiness, but I wasn't. So that was weird and upsetting, and I found ways to distract myself from that for years, but eventually I couldn't distract myself completely, so I went on a quest, not by choice, but by pure suffering of the suffering, the emptiness of going into work every day, like a job that was very prestigious, looked fantastic to everybody on the outside, but I was unhappy on the inside, and I couldn't explain that. So I went on an internal journey eventually, and changed careers, winding, and I don't know what other words I can use, but it was a winding path to becoming a full-time teacher. And I've been teaching mathematics, business, and sometimes theology in the Catholic school system in Mississauga we're going on 17 years now. I've been doing that. In the meantime, on my path from being a CA to a high school teacher, I was a life coach, because once I started doing meditation and found the teachings of Buddhism through the book that changed so many things changed my life, but mostly books and people. But one of them was called Awakening the Buddha Within by Lama Surya Das. And so doing meditation for the first time was the first time I allowed myself in my life to be alone with me, to discover this person that I had never known before. So that uncovered a whole bunch of things. But in the end, I realized that I wanted to help others. I was having a lot of, awakening kind of experiences, is what people would call it. So I wanted to share that. And so I became a life coach, which led me to being a leadership coach and retreat workshop leader in corporations. But then I started doing public retreats, workshops, and with side by side with my life coaching. And one of the workshops was called How to Find a Career You Love, for example. Very well attended, North York. It was like 10 weeks long, and helped people change their lives. It was very fulfilling. But then let's just say things happened. If I get to know you a little bit better, I could tell you the whole story. But some interesting things happened that led me to an organization called Encounter World Religion Center. And long story short, I actually started to work for them as so what they did, what they still do very, very well, is they're an organization that was created to help interfaith dialogue. And through bringing people from different religious backgrounds or non-religious backgrounds to encounter, to actually go and visit mosques and all of the different world religion places of worship. So I've with them, I went to every single possible religious to a place of worship with, and prayed with, and side by side, and broke bread with people from all of the different world's religions, plus some religions that are more marginalized and less known. So that was an amazing experience. So I started working with them. What I really enjoyed was the sacred symbolism, which I learned from the now deceased person who started that organization by the name of J.W. Winland, who was given a prize. Oh, my kids are coming. This is going to be in 2 episodes. My kids are coming back. Okay. Zoom. Well, not whatever. I don't know. Whatever the word is. Abracadabra. Suddenly it's light out. And I'm dressed totally differently, and this time I'm driving. Yeah, just had a little bit of, life went on last night, so I didn't get a chance to continue my video until now. So let me just continue right where I left off. I was just saying that I learned from J.W. Winland, who was honored by the the Council of World Religions, for having founded his organization, the Encounter World Religion Center, which still is going on and still doing amazing work. So I learned from him how should I put it? I learned from him some amazing things about religious symbolism. And so I went on to teach sacred symbols at the high school level, and that's when I got into high schools, and that's when I said, hey, I might like this teaching thing. And I went back to school to get my teaching degree, and then I became a teacher, and that's what I've been doing for the past 17 years or so. But let's fast forward to now, shall we? That's just a little bit of background about me. So, my first encounter with spirituality, like authentic, true spirituality, is through that process. That kind of realizing that all of the things that the external world did present to me as if not the key to happiness, at least the antidote to unhappiness. So, a very good career, I can afford things, I can afford vacations, if I cared to go continue in that direction, that would only get better and better. It didn't work, right? So that first disillusionment with what has been presented to me through the culture, through parents, through friends, through everything that I can see with my eyes, and I'm using that metaphorically because it's see, hear, touch, feel. It's what's enculturated. So that was the beginning of my kind of personal spiritual quest. Now, let's update to why I made this group. and what this group is about. I mean, I think the little intro blurb that I did on the description of the group, I think it says it pretty well. But let me add a little bit, or say it in a different way maybe this time. So there's I believe it's a Buddhist parable. I'm going to say 2 Buddhist parables, I think, right now. The first one is, now I'm not 100% sure if this is Buddhist, to be honest with you, but there's the concept of the teachings, and whether these teachings or any sacred teachings, regardless of religion or modality or belief system or whatever you want to call it, the structure, so that there needs to be a structure so that something could be taught. There has to be. So the saying or the parable is that any structure, so in Buddhism that would be called the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha. In Catholicism, that or in any of the Western traditions, that would be called the beliefs or the dogma of the tradition, right? There's your structure, right? It's a worldview. It's a metaphysics. In Eastern traditions, such as Hinduism, that would be the concepts of Atman and Brahman, and so on. So I'm not going to list all the different traditions, but what this parable says is that whatever your structure is, that it is what the structure is actually not ultimate reality in itself. And that seems obvious, right? But it's not taken that way, right? Many things and many traditions are not seen as, and the concept is it is a finger pointing at the moon. So the structure, the religion, the teachings, the wisdom that can be spoken, that which can be spoken, is ultimately a finger pointing at the moon. In other words, it points you in a direction. Now, a spiritual direction. And of course, all the trouble begins when, as we do as human beings, we cling to that finger as if it were the quote unquote moon, that which it is pointing to. We believe that the finger itself is that thing. And of course it's not. So that's the first thing, that regardless of where you're getting your information from on spirituality, if you're getting your information via the medium or media of your senses, which is of course where we're getting our information, that which can be normally spoken of as informative or information, this is how we gather it, right? We're talking about knowledge that can be known with the mind. However you're acquiring such knowledge, right? So I was brought up Catholic. So, how I started to be introduced to spiritual ideas was through the Catholic Church and attending Mass and the sacraments and all these kinds of things. And a lot of that was pre-verbal. You get baptized in the Catholic Church before you're even, you're not even able to speak. So there was things being done. There was a culture that was already creating your view of spirituality. But there's a structure, and you come to know it whether you're verbal or not, whether you're a baby or not, you come to know it through your senses. And therefore, ultimately, through your, let's say, body-mind, instead of limiting it to mind, I'll say through, it is, you come to know through, in your structure of knowing, called the body-mind. Okay. Now that is true for whatever, right? So whether it's a traditional religious tradition, such as I just mentioned, or an indigenous spiritual tradition, or a New Age spiritual tradition, or something that is based in philosophy, such as the Stoics, or the Platonic, or any philosophy, including philosophies that are scientifically rooted in the scientific tradition. So anything at all where, right, that you've learned, that we have learned about, ultimately, to answer the question, who am I? Like, that's kind of like the ultimate question. Because if you can't answer that question, like, you cannot begin to relate anything. So we are all, whether we're extremely attached to our own finger that is pointing to the moon, or we have many fingers pointing to the moon that we have used, such as myself. I've studied all the world's religions. I have studied, many spiritual modalities, shall we say, and things that are aligned with and closely yoked to spiritual understandings. I've explored many, as I'm sure you have. However, what I see, the thing that I see that's missing, and I watch a lot of the channels, YouTube channels, and listen to a lot of lectures and read a lot of literature, whatever. The thing that I see often missing is this, ultimately, there's a gap where the via negativa is not pronounced as emphatically as the via positiva. So what do I mean by that? Via positiva means anything that could be considered a progressive path, such as any religious system, anything that has the structure that can inform your mind and your body of that which is known previously. That's the via positiva, the progressive path that you're working towards. Like there's an ideal, right? So in Buddhism, the ideal is the Buddha. In Catholicism or in Christianity, the ideal is Jesus. In modern non-duality teachings, the teacher who is considered to be the enlightened one, right, or the enlightened or the master, that's the ideal, right? So there's an ideal that is, because to communicate, we have to communicate in this way. We have to put things in terms of good, bad, right, wrong, ideal, that which is to be avoided, right? We separate. So that's the progressive path, no matter what tradition that you've learned from. Kundalini yoga, doesn't matter. The via negativa is, here's the second Buddhist parable. So the Buddha says this parable of a someone who needed to cross a river. And to cross this river was a very rough river, like it was not easy to cross. You couldn't cross it without a raft. So somehow they got a raft. Now I'm paraphrasing here as I usually do. So they got this raft and they were able to cross the river because, you know, that maybe it was the context, but they were monks and they were going on a spiritual journey and they needed to cross this river. So they got a raft. A raft appeared. I don't know. And so they used the raft. But then this one monk, after they've crossed the river, was so grateful for the raft. And this is a heavy raft. It's made out of wood, you know, it's logs, all that kind of stuff. This monk was so grateful for the utility of the raft that he took it upon himself to carry the raft with him for the rest of the journey. And it's a heavy raft, and it's like he's slogging, right? And, you know, I don't know if there's a, you know, I don't know if this particular type of parable, I don't know if there was like a punchline. I've actually never seen the parable told in a way where there's a final punchline or a twist or something. It's not that kind of parable, at least in the context in which I've heard it. But basically, the Buddha is asking the question, like, you know, how smart is that? Like, I mean, so he's traveling on foot now forever because of he's so grateful for this raft that he will not let it go. He clings to the raft. Now, the Buddha is using this parable to say, you know, the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha. So, like, you know, the Buddha is saying that here, look, I'm giving you my teachings, but let me just tell you this. If you cling to the teachings themselves, if you cling to the Dharma, you're being just like this monk who doesn't get it. He's mistaking the finger for the moon to which the finger is pointing. Right? So, in Buddhism, that warning is there, right? And then, you know, another quote from Buddhism is that the Buddha says to his disciples, be lights unto yourselves, right? In other words, you know, don't even trust my teachings all the time. There's a place that you have to let it go. There's a time to let it go. Now, this is not just in Buddhism, right? I'm mentioning Buddhism because it's like it's got some neat things, and that's what came to mind. But this is not just in Buddhism. So there's every tradition has its mystical branch, right? So Christian mysticism, there's Kabbalah in Judaism, in Hinduism. Advaita Vedanta is sometimes called the mystical branch, right? There's the Sufis from Islam, of which Rumi, the famous poet, is a famous Sufi poet. In every tradition, there is also the teaching, but here's one of the problems. The teaching, this part of the teaching, the via negativa, that is the letting go of all paths. It's inherently subversive, right? It's saying it is, if taken seriously, as it should be, if taken seriously, it is the teaching that says that the authority that is speaking to you and teaching this authority that is saying, like, I am the teacher. It's subversive because it's saying, don't listen to me in the end, or that you can't listen to me, or there's a place where it's like I end and you have to go on your own. So enough said about that. So I have found that this is the thing that I am missing in a lot of the books and the video. Now, it's out there, like it's talked about, and that is returning to complete silence. Now, for me, the closest thing that gets to it is the Advaita Vedanta, non-duality teachings of Rupert Spira is my number one kind of like go-to of like, I listen to him and I go, yep, he's got it. And that's in a lineage, a direct lineage. Some people will know Ramana Maharshi, famous Indian mystic. So there's that. And then there's also the work of Byron Katie. And if you're not familiar with the work, that's what she calls her process of inquiry. But in the end, what it's saying is either one of those approaches, which it's hard to find words now. I acknowledge and adhere to both of those because they help me to let go of absolutely every teaching so that I can marinate myself in pure being. Silence. The other metaphor that I like to use is darkness. But I don't mean darkness. So darkness has a bad connotation in spiritual circles. But of course, I'm not meaning darkness as in quote unquote evil, so-called. I'm talking about darkness in the aspect of the absence of teaching. Now, here's the last thing I'm going to say, because this is all just introduction, and I don't even know if I'm going to post this anywhere. But the last thing I'm going to say is, when I speak of darkness or silence, please know that the via negativa, that of which I am speaking, that to which I am referring, transcends even the concepts of darkness or silence per se. Because when I say silence, all that you and I can conceptualize or take in when we hear the word silence is a relative definition of silence. We, with our senses, counting on our senses, can only understand silence as an opposite to sound. We can only understand darkness relatively as it contrasts from light. Right? So what you need to understand that I'm talking about is it transcends even the highest ideal of what the metaphors of silence or darkness could possibly mean to a, by definition, limited body-mind. Okay? Now, all of that sounds, I know I'm sounding very philosophical. So that sounds really philosophical, right? But it's actually really, really simple. But there is an understanding. And I'll say this, because I've said before that there are things that we know by learning through our senses. And sometimes I would say there's also a knowing which is acquired in a different way, and that is a knowing that is intuitive. And so a lot of wisdom is known intuitively, right? Through a sixth sense, we shall say. But here's what I'm going to say about the via negativa and going into silence. true silence, not relative silence, right? So you have to understand I'm using now the metaphor as a metaphor. I just made that up. Right? If I say silence now, I'm saying like I'm talking about something that actually transcends conceptualized silence as a duality. Here's what I'm going to say. The via negativa also transcends intuitive knowing as well. Right? So, in the end, there's no words, and this is why I like teachers like Rupert Spira. He says it quite often. Others will say it sporadically, and those who don't say it at all, I don't hold them in as high as esteem. And that is to say, everything that I am saying, all the words, it's almost all a waste of time. The words themselves, because the truth, reality, ultimate reality, if you want to call it that, right? There's a judgment already of our limited mind, right? That there's an ultimate reality. So if there's an ultimate reality, that already creates the duality of, well, there's a reality that's not the ultimate duality, the ultimate reality, right? But these are all things that become obvious once you marinate yourself in pure being. But the teachers like Rupert Spira who say, like, everything I'm about to, sometimes he does a teaching where he says, everything I'm about to say is wrong. Nothing I'm about to say is true. So, right, it's nothing about it. However, words is the only way I can communicate. So there are people who would be silent about this, and, good on them. Because in the end, it's all absolute. And I don't mean to be disparaging, right? Like, he goes on in that same talk to say some really cool stuff that is really useful and has helped me, right? But it's to realize that all of that talking is just the finger. It's not the moon itself. So in this group, what I'm hoping, and I don't know how I'm going to do this, is what we're going to kind of figure out. I know my, what I call my, I don't call it my practice. Breathwork, meditation, cold dipping, satsang, right? So just allowing the voice of truth and reality to rise, and gathering for that. I don't call that my practice, right? That's I don't call it my practice. Like that's the word that modern, or not modern, any spiritual tradition would call, like, it's your practice. Like in Western traditions, it would be prayer. In Eastern traditions, it would be things such as yoga and meditation. That's not my practice. The actual practice is daily life. The actual practice is what happens in moments of daily life that are extremely challenging and that are unwanted. Because if there's anything that I'm going to say about my point of view and what I'm hoping people can gather around and experience together, I would say this: it's a realization. Bad word. There are no good words. You got to remember, man. There's no good words, okay? But there's a realization that there is nowhere to get to. There is no there better than here. That in itself that is the beginning of not seeing and not being with being. Right? So the words are very, very difficult. So there's nowhere to get to, right? So when I do my practice, as I'm about to do now, I'm about to go to the beach and I'm about to do some, it's all meditation, but in the form of breath work with music, and I'm going to go for a cold dip. I'm going to affirm right now, even now as I'm saying this into the camera, I'm saying to you, this isn't going to get me any closer to anything, right? And I acknowledge that. This is not a method to be used for the purpose of attaining anything of value. Because the ultimate, here I am using that word again, the ultimate reality, being, awareness, consciousness, Buddha nature, the divine feminine, which is probably the closest, analogy. You name it, whatever you name it, whatever you name it, because naming it is already the beginning of the end, so it doesn't matter. But I am going into that which other people would refer to as a practice. I already know that it cannot possibly bring me any closer to anything that I am not already one with. And therefore, there's nothing to attain. There's nothing to achieve. Achievement, attainment, these are concepts born of the world that is contained by space and time. And the via negativa has me knowing that the world of space and time, including all the beautiful teachings, all the beautiful modalities, all the beautiful, including my breath work that I'm going to do, and any feeling of oneness I can have with all that exists, any feeling of oneness that I can have with all that exists through these modalities that could bring me into the now, as they say. That's all an illusion, because, right, or the illusion is believing that it is the practice that somehow, for me, clears the sky so that I can have this experience of being one with everything. If you're one with everything, you're always one with everything, because it is if that is your nature, then that is what you are, regardless of what it feels like, regardless of what it, right? So the moon, to which the fingers of all modalities, all traditions, all religions, all practices, what they point to, we already are that. And that's the All right. So if this is the last thing I got to say, because I got to go now. If traditions and teachings are the finger pointing to the moon, then the moon itself is your true nature. And it is not it cannot be limited to it cannot be limited. I'm going to leave it at that. I think I'll leave it at that. It cannot be limited. So if you go on and continue to believe that your practices that are grounded in the progressive path, which is absolutely, I'm not saying like I'm going to continue doing breath work. I'm going to continue doing meditation. Like I'm going to do all this stuff because that's what this character, me, the me that you see, the me that you hear, that's what this character is into. You know, that's what this character is into. But the moment that I'm not saying my character now, the moment that I give over my heart, and that is to say, I give over my faith in a belief that any positive path, progressive path, way is the way for me to achieve, well, there's the illusion, and I've already lost it. Okay, so some of this stuff is really hard to say. So look, the idea of this group, okay, if I'm ever going to use this video, I have no idea. But the idea of this group is, if that resonates, if any of that resonates with you, then that's what I want this to be about, right? So I don't know if this is going to end up being, I'm just going to, you know, I just want to share the experience. I want to share, right? And that's why I made this group. So we'll see what happens. I don't like to do things online personally. That's my character. But we'll see. We might start things off that way and see how it goes, okay? But hopefully this video makes it clear where I'm coming from, right? So there's nowhere to get to. I'll end off with one last parable from Jesus. I quote Jesus quite often because, of course, it's the teachings I know the most. So Jesus gave this, you know, it was probably in the Sermon on the Mount. And he gives a parable about a man that the kingdom of, right? So his metaphor for ultimate being, ultimate reality, whatever you want to call it. His metaphor is like the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven, right? The kingdom of heaven is within, you know. So he says, the kingdom of heaven is like this. A man found a great treasure in a field. And it was such a great treasure that what does he do with the great treasure? He buries it back in the field, right? He buries it. So he found a great treasure. And what does he decide to do with it? He buries it back in the field. And he goes off and sells everything he owns. and buys that field. And that's the end of the parable. Okay, so here's what I want you to think about, or here's what I think about. What I think about is, like, you know, it's one of those parables. It's just like when Jesus says, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Like, you go like, what the F does that mean, man? Like, what are you talking about? And he says, the kingdom of heaven is just like that. It's a treasure. It's the ultimate treasure. It's the ultimate treasure. But its value is inherent to it, right? Any other kind of treasure where the value of that treasure is relative, that is to say, it has value because, like if we're talking about a diamond, right, a treasure, if we're talking about a diamond or any gold or anything like that, the only reason it has value is because others believe it has value. So its value is relative, because in another society, in another culture, in another universe, it's just as likely that it could have no value. So its value is not inherent. Its value is ascribed by duality. But this treasure, the kind of treasure that you could find and literally when it says sell everything, he sold everything to buy the field, right? Well, you can't buy the treasure, right? Because it's a spiritual treasure, man. It's got a totally different quality than physical treasure, or treasure that is of the world of time and space. So I want to end off with that and think about that. The fact that he sold everything means that once you realize the true, once you realize what is being, then you realize that nothing else matters. Like nothing else matters. And this moment right now is so sufficient. Every moment, even the worst moment of your experience, it is so sufficient in and of itself. That's the metaphor of he sold everything. Nothing else matters. Like nothing else matters. So he buys the field for a treasure that he can't see it. He buried it back. Here's the other thing. He buried the treasure back. So he can't, in the seeing of the treasure is, so you might think to yourself, well, okay, well, we know that there are people who love art, and so they'll buy a Picasso, like they're rich, right? Maybe they're a rich person. They buy a Picasso and they put it in their house and they get to see it, right? And if you're not their friend, or they might even have it in a private room. Hey, maybe it was even, they bought it on the black market. So it's like not even known. They can't even share it with anybody, but they can see it, right? And so, it's a treasure to them because anytime that they want to, they could go into that room where the Picasso is and they could see it, right? So again, the value is in duality, because even if nobody else gets to see it, or the person doesn't intend to share the value of this treasure, they get, right? And whatever that means to them, like they get the value of it, right? So again, its value is relative. It's relative to the individual, right? So, but Jesus is saying is that this type of treasure is different even from that. You who found the treasure and knows about the treasure, you don't even get to see it. You can't see it. So if anything, I think that's probably, I don't even know if I have a better metaphor myself. Like I can't compete with the JC, you know what I'm saying? The JC was pretty, like, he was pretty rad, man. He was pretty rad. So I'm not like, of course I can't compete, right, with the JC. It's not a competition. But I honestly can't think of a better metaphor. Did I just say better and then say meta? I can't think of a better metaphor for what I'm talking about and what I have found. The finding of the treasure in the first place is what is called in the Dzogchen tradition. I might be pronouncing that completely wrong. Of Buddhism, might be called what is called the glimpse. You get a glimpse of the truth, and that glimpse is all you need to kind of understand and go forward. But you don't live in the glimpse. You don't live, unless you like whatever. To live in the glimpse would be to make the glimpse into an experience, which it is not an experience, because experience itself only exists in duality, right? And these are things that transcend all contrasts, all dualities, right? So I think it's a really good metaphor for what I'm talking about. So that's it. That's what this group is about. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? I don't know. Time will tell. Peace. I'm going to go jump in the lake.